sorcerer, but I'll gladly test your steel, old friend.
Greetings, all explorers, prime explorers, viewers, and other members of the channel, and welcome to the live stream exploration of alchemy on the Restitutor Orbis channel. I'm your host, Lucius Aurelian, and we are going to be exploring alchemy tonight. Now, what you're looking at on your screens is one of the quintessential images that we have in mind of alchemy, and one of the first things that we want to do is define alchemy. And what exactly do we think alchemy actually is? A lot of people have this image in their mind that alchemy was some sort of esoteric or little known, much written about practice from the medieval period, where there were scientists or wizards or sorcerers who managed to use concoctions and make many different things in great bottles and great flasks, and they were able to produce things. And that tends to be the worldview that we have of alchemy. And the reason that I bring that up is that seems to be the view that's given to us about alchemy. So that's why it's important that we define it. When you look it up, whether it's on Wikipedia or in any sort of academic study, and when I learned about alchemy back in my teaching days, I remember learning, was it really a philosophy or was it an actual science? And what are all your thoughts on it? Did you learn it as a philosophy or a science? Because when you look up the definition, they actually try to say it's both. So anyway, I'll just say hello to everybody as you're coming on in and we talk, because I want to get right to the topic on this one, because there's a lot to say about alchemy. And it is one of those bases of knowledge that whether you see it as a science or a philosophy, it does actually capture a lot of different aspects to it. So, and a lot of people, thank you, critical thinker, they say it's magic. And a lot of people do view it as magic. Although a question I'll leave for you is, do people view science as magic? Oh, look at that, Sky Sage. Yes, the science of magic. Wonderful, wonderful wordsmithing there again. Good to see you, Robert. Yep. And one thing about understanding what alchemy is it seems to be something that historically there is a confused account on, because what we're told officially is that it is a philosophy, and it's a philosophy that's practiced everywhere, or at least it was practiced everywhere, whether it was in Europe or whether it was in the Islamic world, China, India. They basically do the hand wave that it was everywhere in what they used to call the old world, not what we think of as the old world. The magic of science, absolutely right. Now, they also define it as a proto-science. And what exactly is a proto-science? Well, they even say that alchemy was actually the origin of all science. And so when we're defining alchemy, we're going to do two things. We're going to look at what it really is, what we're told that it did, when did it actually exist, at least in terms of the mainstream historical account. And then we're going to come up with some theories in terms of how it's actually applied. Is it a science? Is it a philosophy? Or is it a base of knowledge? Well, just to get right to the bottom line up front, I am going to say that it is a base of knowledge. It's a base of knowledge that can be applied spiritually. It's a base of knowledge that can be applied physically. And it's also a base of knowledge that can be applied to just about any other aspect to life. But we have to get an understanding of what alchemy is in general. Absolutely right, Rebecca. And I think that's a lot of what it is. So is it everything? Was it everywhere? Yes. And the study of alchemy is one of those difficulties for the mainstream, because they have to address its existence, because it is in all the quote unquote well-documented accounts of all the main civilizations that we have. Everybody has an account and a history of alchemy. And what you're looking at here is one of the main pictures that people think of alchemy. But let's dive into it and see what we really have. So this is a little summarized one-pager on alchemy knowledge, and this was actually something I recall being shown in the classes. So let me just make sure you can all see this really well. Absolutely right. It is both. It's everything. It's internal, it's external, the alchemical trinity. And we'll talk about what the main purpose or function of alchemy was. What was the end-all, be-all of alchemy? Because basically every philosophy has its end-all, be-all. Well, alchemy did too. Of course, we could say that current science has its end-all, be-all, and that is do as I say and don't think for yourself, right? So in any event, Looking at the baseline of alchemical knowledge, though, you have the 7 states of alchemical transformation. You have calcination, dissolution, separation, conjunction, fermentation, distillation, coagulation. Now, I know I'm going through this a bit fast, but these are the steps that involves the transformation of material, which is supposed to be one of the baseline aspects of alchemy, that you can turn any baseline material into the greatest materials, or in the simple comparison they tend to use, mercury into gold, or stones into gold, or whatever. You also have the Pythagorean cosmic morphology. So this is more the spiritual aspect of it. The original 4 elements, earth, fire, air, and water. And then here they have Gaia as well. And then the different shapes. There's a lot of different aspects to alchemy. There's also the alchemical symbols. Hermes the alchemist. And there's many different symbols. The study of symbology, not to be confused with symbolism. What is the symbolism of it? Okay, I'll stop. I know somebody's out there getting a laugh out of it, but they have many different esoteric symbols. And it's also another game on words because is it exoteric or exoteric? In other words, known and demonstrated to the masses, or esoteric with an S, known only by a few. A lot of the real study of alchemy is an interesting contradiction because it tends to include both. We have both aspects. We have things that are well known, but yet there's what everybody thinks of alchemy. Well, it's basically magic from the Middle Ages, and it was pretty crazy, and that's why people gave it up. Would you be surprised to know, though, that alchemy is also acknowledged by current science and historians as being the forerunner of current science, current medical practices, current chemistry? Were any of you aware of that? Yeah, space of knowledge. Very true. And Da Vinci, supposedly. There were many great leaders in alchemy back in the day. That's a good way to put it. Everything is alchemical. Absolutely. And who did I miss there? Well, thanks. I really appreciate that. Yeah, the potions class. And you can really pull it back to that baseline mentality. Now, the other question I'm going to ask you is, when did alchemy start? A lot of people think that it started in the Middle Ages or the medieval period. Would you be surprised to know, though, that official history states that it started back around 3 to 400 CE, AD, whatever date system you want to go with? Yeah. Mix this, get that with the gold. That's right. And you can see it on this sheet here in terms of how it's all supposed to work. Now, granted, this is just a very broad stroke brush in terms of how academia or the current academic institution regards alchemy. Now, you're probably not too surprised to know that there are many different authors, there's many different schools of thought, and many different theories within the mainstream itself about the origin of alchemy. But what we can say is that it did start during that very bizarre time frame with the library in Alexandria. And we see some of the symbols of alchemy, and they do look rather familiar to us. And we do actually see them, including in many of the building explorations that we do. And why is that, do you think? Why do you think we see this in so many different places as we define alchemy? Oh, yeah. And forbidden divine knowledge provided by angels, is it some sort of scientific thought? Did it precede all religion? Or is it merely a broken apart aspect of the civilization that we had before, one of their fundamental belief systems that was separated from religion? Because isn't it interesting that according to the mainstream account, alchemy exists in all the major religions, or at least the areas that they were known to operate in? You know, and here you have all these different symbols and aspects to alchemy. And there are a lot of symbols in alchemy. We're not even beginning to scratch the surface with them. But what does it really represent? Well, we can do a full study on symbols and everything behind it, but it all comes down to 2 aspects within alchemy. And really, it's the quest for achieving one thing. And we'll get to that in a moment. I'm sure those of you who are familiar with alchemy already know what it is. But the imagery and the iconography with it, it really communicates a lot of different things. You always have the king and the queen. You always have the sun and the moon. Those are some baselines. And of course, we'll get to the almighty Ouroboros, or the beginning and ending of everything. So what are your thoughts on this layout of alchemy so far? Yes. I'm glad you brought that up, Sky Sage, because it's very interesting that the study of Gnosticism is something that certain alternative researchers seem to go out of their way to deride for whatever reason. They think it's something that needs to be purged from the entire truther community or the alternative research community. Now, I don't like I'm sure you're familiar with me, but I don't like operating in large collectivizations. I don't believe in it. I believe everybody should do their own research, come to their own conclusions. That's how I prefer to operate. Look at that. Yep, Jamie's on it. The quest for the philosopher's stone, and that's the real end-all be-all of alchemy. But for whatever reason, certain truthers don't like to talk about, and I don't like using terms like that, but we'll just say certain alternative researchers do not like to talk about Gnosticism. And by virtue of connection to that, they don't like to talk about alchemy, and they want it stricken from all discussion. They believe it's a plague or a stigma on this kind of alternative research. And so be it. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, including other alternative researchers. But I think it's interesting, though, that alchemy provides so many powerful explanations. And you know what, KFD? I think that sums it up right there. Alchemy is universal knowledge. I believe it's universal knowledge, and I believe it's something that we have that comes all the way back from the oldest elements of our civilization, perhaps originating in the first era, which I'm not allowed to, and I'm certainly not encouraged to talk about. But we know it exists, right? We know it exists. So moving on, we have other different imagery or other different images of alchemy. We think of it as this process of where you have all these different connected scientific devices and all these measuring devices and lots of hoses, and it all connects to a central apparatus, and you're able to make some sort of concoction. And there are a lot of elements to that that's truth. And in fact, if you go back and watch my favorite series, I'm being facetious, of course, but Cosmos with Carl Sagan, when they have that little apparatus that they construct that creates the building blocks of life, it looks something like this. Coincidence? And then, of course, you have the main laboratory or laboratory if you're speaking British English. And of course, you know how I like to poke fun at pronunciations and dialects because there's over 160 for English or many, many more. But this is what we tend to have in mind when we think of alchemists, these kind of images. And then there's also a lot of symbolic writing to this. And of course, when you look at this, it almost looks like we're looking at the Voynich manuscript or something with a lot of different incantations, various devices that could be telling us how to do different things, how to mix and make different things, how to match different things. We also have different types of symbols that we talked about earlier. And again, this is not even close to all the symbols. There's hundreds, thousands of different symbols in coded talk. Now, why do you think they had all this coded talk? What did this all come down from? Yeah, it comes up a lot, doesn't it? Yeah, there's a steampunk vibe to alchemical devices, without any shadow of a doubt. Alcohol is alchemy. That's a good one, Rebecca. Yeah, in a manner of speaking, it is mixing and matching. And, why do we have all those breweries that are in the old world castle buildings? Yeah, you're right, Robert. A lot of them are occult symbols. A lot of them are used by many of the quote unquote secret societies, although when everybody knows about them, I don't know why we call them secret societies. So, there he is. When you're going to show up. Good to see you. So, going over some of the symbolism and the symbology, because we've got both in alchemy. Now, here's a little bit more of a comprehensive view of the symbols so you can see what some of the rest of them look like. And you may notice that we have come across a lot of these symbols when we've done our initial explorations, whether it's in buildings, whether it's in looking at old documents or texts. You'll see these symbols come up everywhere. Now, you may be surprised to know, though, that in one of our on-site explorations that we've done on the channel, we've actually been in a building that I believe is very strongly affiliated with alchemy, or at least the studies of alchemy that went to, how shall we say, the dark side. Now, wait a minute. What are you talking about? The Force or something here? Well, there is always a light and a dark side to everything, and everything exists in balance. There are aspects of alchemy that have a lot of positive connotations to them, and there's also a lot of negative connotations to alchemy. And we're going to be exploring that as well. No, I'm not shirking away from anything in this exploration. Yeah. Taurus the bull sign. That's a good one. And a lot of it is secret teachings. Absolutely right. Or was it originally secret, or was it something that had to be secret? Was it something that was suppressed? In other words, the powers that be tried to eliminate it. So, in any event, good to see you, Stephen. Good to see you. Yeah, don't we? 100% fusion match. Yes. Where's cold fusion? Didn't they promise that quite a long time ago? That sounded like something that was alchemy. No doubt about it. And you're right, the symbols do change, just like the language and the dialects change. So, there is a lot of potential in it, Corky. You're right. And that's something that we include in the definition, especially when we talk about what the final goal of alchemy really is. And here you have it with some of the more common alchemical symbols. And what is the grand exploration of alchemy all about? Well, it comes down to this. They're seeking the philosopher's stone, the magnum opus, or the great work. So, in other words, all these alchemists, whether they were from 300 AD or ACE, or however the heck you want to say it, it doesn't really matter. Our entire recorded history from basically right after the collapse of the Roman Empire, according to official history, up until the late 1800s, what they were seeking was the philosopher's stone. Alchemists were seeking the philosopher's stone. That was the great work. In other words, it was a special material that could transmute any other material into gold. And then, even more importantly, it was considered the elixir of life. In other words, it would allow you to live forever. Now, does that mean your physical body, or does that mean something else? Oh, look at that, Rebecca. I mean, did you just see the answers to the tests? Bingo. Absolutely right. And there are accounts that several did accomplish the Philosopher's Stone, Elvin, and we'll take a look at that. Yes, many of the alchemists searched for the Philosopher's Stone, and there are accounts that there are some that actually found it. But really, what it comes down to, as Jamie says, it's anything into anything, and it promises life eternal, which is something that people who fear death are always looking for. Exactly. It's universal knowledge, but what changes is the changing outlook. Oh, that's true. And that's also true with the knowledge base. And that's why I would make the argument, my theory is that alchemy is a base of knowledge. But there's a little bit more to it because it's also seen as an internal spiritual quest. And when you look at the origin of it, and a lot of the original documents of alchemy were lost over time, it was also internal as well. So it goes back to what Rebecca was saying. Humans forgot that they already had immortal life. And yet, this is what they're promising people. Yes. Now, there's a lot of discussions about what a soul is, and we're not going to go down that road today. We'll get to that in subsequent explorations, but we're seeing what alchemy promised and what it really could have been. So, it led to many different things. It seemed to be a base of knowledge that came from the very old world that gave people the ability to do many different things, transmute materials, heal anything. And when we talk about the difference between, and I'm going to go on dangerous ground here, but the current medicine practices that we have, they're supposedly derived from original alchemy. So, in any event, those are all things to keep in mind with it. And here is the baseline symbol of alchemy, the Ouroboros. And does everybody know what the Ouroboros means? The snake eating itself. The beginning and the end. A cycle. Yeah, or was it derived from AIT fetch? That's a good point. And why is that? Why do we have that amnesia? Is it because we simply go down all these rabbit holes and we forget what we already know? And then we stop trusting ourselves, and then we trust deception because we don't trust ourselves. And that's another good way to put it, as above, so below. And so that's why it really comes down to the search for the philosopher's stone. The original philosophy of alchemy was that it was a search for within. In other words, look inside yourself, find the spiritual strength within yourself, and then the rest of these great abilities of alchemy, or what the original philosophy suggested, or the base of knowledge, was that then you could achieve all these great things. You could achieve a material that could transmute to other materials. You could achieve the ability to actually control the course of life itself. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen that one. Oh, Conan. Yes. What is great in life? But that's the real baseline for it. You know, it was supposed to be a quest for oneself. And then as you look at how the mainstream says it evolved or de-evolved, however you want to look at it, by the Middle Ages or the medieval time frame, 13 to 1600s, then it'd simply become a quest for A, immortality, and then B, riches, because if you could transmute any material into gold, you'd be rich. Of course, we have our current science where they say that using atomic processes, they could create gold as early as the 1940s, but they just don't bother to do so because it's not cost effective. Yeah, isn't it funny that they talk about that? Well, and you know what? I'm glad you brought that up, Stephen, because that's how those all relate together. But what's the real quest? Is it a quest for internal salvation, or is it a quest for external and physical pleasures? And that's always the debate. Mm, yeah, pretty much the original nano lathe. Yeah. And that's probably where a lot of those inspirations came from, Jamie. You're right. And I think it does include everything. And please make sure you hit that like button. And I appreciate everybody joining. And by all means, keep contributing your opinions because this is an open study. Now, there's also the concept of existence and shapes and dimensions. Those are examined in alchemy, and that's been lost over the course of time. And as you go further back, you can actually find more of the references to it, which is quite intriguing. Now, this is one of the baseline images that you'll see that represents alchemy, the symbolism, a couple birds, and then, of course, the Ouroboros, although the snake or the dragon or whatever you want to say it is actually on its back. And yet, when we look at other images of alchemy, we can see that it gets a lot more complex. There's many more ideologies that broker into it. Now, one of the things that I find fascinating about looking at the symbolism in the account of alchemy is how much it looks like our old friends in the Voynich manuscript. Oh, yeah. It's all in there, Adam. I mean, you'll see every symbol you can imagine within alchemy. So, yeah. And you know, it's funny you referenced that one, Rebecca, because the quest for the Holy Grail was just that. It's a bunch of fools that are looking physically for something. Whereas if you watch the film Excalibur, it's accurately depicted as finding out what you already knew. Arthur had to be reminded of what he already knew, that he and the land were one. At least that's how the story comes across. So again, searching internally, not externally. Hmm. Well, and are we told the truth or do we have to seek the truth internally? I mean, that's the great question that we're always facing. Aha. And that was actually the very summation right there, Robert, the very baseline belief of what alchemy was really all about. You were doing an internal search, you were finding your own answers, you were determining your purpose in life. And that's what it was all about. You were finding your own purpose. And there's a lot of romanticized images, and I use that word very directly from the medieval time frame because this is what people were obsessed with. And you saw people in all these very elaborate outfits during the time when there were famines, wars, disease, and yet there were these magicians called alchemists who could just suddenly produce you gold out of everything. And then they would give you the elixir of light. Remember Saint Germain? Remember that episode of In Search of? Yeah, it all comes from that as well. And then some of the other symbols where they started to incorporate it with more of a spiritual quest, if you will. And so what you're finding as you look more into alchemy is that it gets more confused and more, how shall we say, derided over time. And it becomes a derivative, much like we see in all of our remakes that we have now. Good one. Merlin the Wizard. Probably an actual original alchemist. And if you look at the role that Merlin plays in the original Arthurian legends and even the film, of course, I'm only talking about Excalibur, then you see that Merlin is very much one of the senior alchemists, which is quite intriguing about it. Yes, indeed. And it's not an easy topic to talk about. And it's not exactly something that people want to really think about. They want to embrace the concept of alchemy that was pushed in the Middle Ages or the medieval time frame, that we're looking for the philosopher's stone, and then we're looking for the elixir of life. And then what does our mainstream tell us? Well, we already have these capabilities. We can already turn any material into gold. We just don't do so because it's not cost effective. We're still looking to give you that eternal life thing, and we're going to keep promising that, but nothing ever seems to come from it. That's a good one, John. Yeah, no doubt about it. Oh, yeah, there's a couple who've claimed it, and maybe so. Or maybe all of us have. Yeah, exactly, Heidi, exactly. So, oh, yeah. Yoga, katas, internal Far Eastern methodology. And it's funny to me how all the truth seems to be scattered across all of our different cultures and societies all across the land. Yeah, beyond any shadow of a doubt. But then you also see some of the other symbolism behind it. You can get the idea of creation, being able to create different life forms, and that's a little bit more of the darker side to it that we'll get to in a moment. And that's always something that got to me about alchemy. And you can see these are supposedly images from a successful attempt at creating the Philosopher's Stone. That's what some of these images are actually from, representing that. And then you even get the concept of the different sorts of life forms that they were able to create. Now, just think about this. If this was a baseline knowledge from earlier civilizations, then what were they really able to achieve with this? What did it really show? What were their capabilities? Because we have all these creatures, to include Pegasus, the winged horse, the griffin, and the chimera that we'll look at, that could well have been created by alchemy. Mm. Ah, well, and it could just simply be the hardship, the quest itself, the experience. That's another way to look at it. Oh yeah, and the blimmies too. So there's many different ways that you have to look at it, and you have to seek it out, whether it is an actual material or whether it's an internal struggle. So many different ways to look at it. This is an interesting image that I always found that comes from the alchemical concept, which shows the eternal life coming from the sun. And indeed, this supposedly brought down a lot of sun worshippers, although you see there's a little bit more of the symbolism here within this particular image, with the different the birds, the swans, and then the way the light's coming down and how it's regenerating life. We even have what looks to be interesting structures in the back here. A lot of interesting artwork, though, that's affiliated with alchemy. And then it should also be noted that it's very well documented by all the major civilizations, whether it was Islam or Latin or what have you, the Roman Empire, if that really existed as we were taught, or, it's just something else. It's intriguing to think of, though, that alchemy supposedly had its roots all the way back in the very origin of civilization. So for us, we might think of that as the first era. So a lot of different aspects to it and a lot of different ways to look at it. Hmm. Yes, you're right, quantum paradox. And where do you think those solar logos came from? Why do you think that concept is viewed as one of the baselines of the whole concept of sun worship? Now, I get accused of everything from my logo, from being a member of the Masons to being a sun worshiper, and I can assure you neither is true. Like I said, the sun that I have was merely a gift from my students as they drew it up because their favorite lesson was on Lucius Aurelian and the religion of Sol Invictus. So there you're hearing it from me. That's where it all came from. But always interesting, though, that these were the depictions that they give us of alchemy. So why do you think it would be that they want us to only think that alchemy is just something that was just a lot of crazy sorcerers or charlatans, because that's the term it got associated with in the medieval time frame, and there's no reality to it? Why do you think that they would push that aspect so hard? That it didn't really exist, it was just a bunch of charlatans who were practicing things that they shouldn't have practiced. Well, and people will come after you for every different way. I mean, my logo could be something as simple as just saying LA. What are you, some sort of supporter of Los Angeles? It's just funny to me. But you got to be able to laugh about things. Ah, you're absolutely right, quantum paradox. Because when people are misled, when they believe something, then they're going to follow something. They're going to think it's the absolute truth. Ah, yes. Ridiculing them and finding every way, shape, and form to do so. And that happens all the time. And it's always funny to me the amount of effort that goes into it. Now, the image we're looking at here is the very representation of the Philosopher's Stone, or the magnum opus that the alchemists looked for. But I think it's something that we need to make sure that we understand. Sorry, Rebecca. I just had to laugh about that one. So good to see you, Jedi. Glad you could join us. Yeah, I know, Scotty. I know. I spend too much time worshiping the sun, but I mean, I think there is something to be said, though, about the natural environment and actually being re-energized by our natural environment. Now, I don't think it's just the sun. I think it's everything. You find strength in everything, not just the sun, but the rain, the clouds, the land, your horse, your dog, your parrot, whatever animal that you have. Oh, that's a good one, Chassis. Why don't you start that in the comments, and you can start a whole nother conspiracy theory about that on the channel. Get it? Okay. Anyway, back on topic. But the whole magnum opus was what they were looking for and what they were trying to achieve. Now, this is supposedly an image that represented achieving the Philosopher's Stone. It's represented here in the breastplate on this image. Now, this was from a series of art plates that supposedly came from the time when there were a couple alchemists in the medieval time frame that achieved the Philosopher's Stone and the elixir of life. And it was represented by this interesting multicolored breastplate right here. Yeah, not sure what to make of it. And for all we know, maybe it's just something that they passed down to us, so we could be ridiculed. we're going to tell them to laugh at this breastplate. Yes, this is the Philosopher's Stone. This is the elixir of life. Joke's on you. I mean, what do you think? Does that all add up, or could there be some truth to it? Oh, yes, it comes up quite a bit, as does many other symbols of alchemy. Yeah, the armor itself is rather suspect. And that's kind of what they're trying to show. They're trying to show a little bit of a visual appearance to it. Oh, yeah. And we get a lot of those esoteric helmets, don't we, Sky Sage? Not exactly what you'd think of as the traditional medieval or Middle Ages helmet. Yeah. Did Saint Germain exist? Or, if you go back and you watch, what was her name? Elizabeth Clare Prophet on In Search of, he just incarnated as all these different people. He was Merlin. He wasn't Napoleon. I'm trying to remember who he was in the Revolutionary War. He told them all to sign that thing. Oh, yeah. And it is very ornate armor, and that's what it all comes down to. Depicting and giving the concept of the Philosopher's Stone. But is the great work internal or external, or is it both? Well, if you look at the baseline and all the documents, you get the impression it's both. You have to achieve internal balance before you can express external balance. And if you think about that, that actually explains a lot of what we see with the great achievements of architecture in the past from the previous civilizations. They had achieved internal balance, and therefore they were capable of doing many great feats. So, some very interesting and intricate imagery, though, that is conveyed with alchemy, as you can see right here. There's many different interpretations you can make of these symbols. And yet at the same time, these are all symbols that we've seen before in many other places. And it's probably one of the most beautiful aspects of researching alchemy is just some of the symbolism and artwork that you see in it. Are you seeing wars? Are you seeing rebirth? Here you have the concept of the king and queen, king of the sun, queen of the moon, and the depictions of both of them. So again, what it represents is a world in balance. And that was ultimately the main focus of alchemy, a world in balance, or as they say in Far Eastern philosophy, yin yang. Aha, yes, precisely. Hey, Crypto Alchemist, and I was hoping you were going to make this one. Yeah, the peacock comes up a lot too, doesn't it? It's another one of those symbols that we see. Red dragon versus white dragon. Yep. Do the colors have a meaning? Not really sure. Yes, isn't it? Isn't that an interesting observation? Very true. Yes, we are. And doesn't it seem like there's so many things that seem to work to pull us out of balance? Or, as Lancelot said in Excalibur, your rage has unbalanced you. Interesting line, isn't it? So many wonderful things in that movie, Excalibur 1981. I will never not recommend it. Oh, yeah. Well, and so does the Space Force, too. So make of that what you will. What is the sphere? Yeah, let's take a close look at that. Isn't that interesting? Almost a broken sphere. You know what? I don't know. I'll have to do a little bit more research on this and see if I can ascertain what they're saying that actually is. I mean, we can come to our own interpretations. I'm always fascinated by the very brilliant architecture, though. This is supposedly an image from the 1400s, but who knows for sure. And here they're actually showing the mining, as though we've actually got little elves here that are mining for it. I mean, what kind of outfits are they wearing? But, it's just a representation. Here you got more of a yellow golden sun showing the long search for the materials to create the material for the Philosopher's Stone, supposedly. And then always the flask, always the jar, always the beaker, whatever terms we want to call it. It's always depicted very prominently. And what exactly is it meaning? What's it telling us? Thanks, Corey. Appreciate that. It's all good. It's all good. Oh, yeah. And I think that's what it's trying to tell us, and that's what they're trying to show us as well. But The other thing. Oh, hold on, J-Dubs. We're getting homunculuses. Don't worry. Search your inner self. Yes, indeed. And that seems to be what everything is derived to take us away from. Focus only on what you see, not what you feel. Ah, yes, very true. And then, of course, we end with this particular depiction of the sun. And yet here we see a little bit of red, a little bit of yellow, a little bit of gold. It'd be interesting to see a red sun in the sky. Have there been times when anybody's seen a red sun? Yeah, I'm going back to that exploration we did earlier. But what's the significance behind the red sun? And is there ever a time that you could see a red sun? Don't know. Not sure. We've already talked about a couple different alchemists since you were asking about it, but exactly. And I have too. And the time I can remember was during one of those times when they said we had a lot of wildfires and there was a lot of ash and soot in the air. And that appeared to be the red sun. Red sun is also prominently featured in Superman, especially the 1978 movie, where they very specifically referred to a red sun and a yellow sun. Jor-El says yellow sun, General Zod says yellow sun. So, precisely. And I think that's something we need to pay attention to because oftentimes we take a lot of things for granted. Oh, yes. Different colorations of the moon, too. And so, what's that have to do with alchemy? Alchemy reflects the entire process of life. It reflects the entire aspect of everything that we're searching for, starting internally and then externally. Yep, I think this might be Prague. What do you think? Or it could have been any old world city, as they all looked like that at one point in time. Yes, and then I wanted to show unobtainium, even though I wasn't the greatest fan of this movie that this was from, but unobtainium being that material that can do anything. That's kind of a way to look at the philosopher's stone. It is unobtainium. It is the material that can do anything. Indeed. Sacred geometry. Good observation there. And I think in a lot of ways it is. But unobtainium is how they try to represent it in the modern context. It's how they try to show it in movies. It's what they want to show the philosopher's stone is. So, yes, very true. And it's kind of funny how they still continue to keep people obsessed with the concept of gold. I mean, maybe you saw that recent movie that came out of Australia that was called Gold that had kind of an interesting post-apocalyptic theme to it, and then it just became a survival flick when two guys found a big nugget of gold in the middle of the desert, and then one had to stay and the other had to go to find an excavator, and then the one that stayed just slowly eroded over time. So, oh, the pineal gland. Yes, we're gonna have to watch The Beyond again, aren't we? Good movie there. Jeffrey Combs, Barbara Crampton from the 80s. Naturally, what other decade would it be from, right? Yeah, I think one of these explorations, Rebecca, I'm going to have to do a Red Mercury exploration. That's definitely one topic I'm going to have to tackle at one point. Oh, yeah. Very, very true. Okay, so let's get to some historical examples of alchemists. So there are numerous historical examples of alchemists, and some of the well-known ones were right around that time of the Library of Alexandria, although they'll say it's a couple hundred years before or after, but they say it's in that general time frame. Who knows for sure? And you can find many different examples. And of course, we don't want to overlook the fact that we're told in the official historical account that Islam and the developed intellectual capacity of Islam and their recordings kept alchemy going. Although what I find interesting is that alchemy is in all the major cultures. It transcends all the boundaries. So in a manner of speaking, this philosophy, this proto-science is more evidence, just like all the buildings that we see all across the land that have the same architectural stylings, that we have this philosophy that's all across the land that shows us that this came from a previous civilization that was everywhere. Now, maybe I'm going too far with that. That's just a theory, but I find it awfully odd that we have this concept of alchemy, and it's very similar, whether you're in China, whether you're in Turkey, or whether you're in France, depending on the time frame, that they're all looking for the same things. Philosopher's Stone, internal enlightenment, and then the further back you go in researching, you'll see that's exactly what they were saying. There were also several prominent women alchemists that were forgotten over history, and that seems to be a recurring theme as well, especially when we go back to the Library of Alexandria. So who knows exactly what was going on? Do we have different aspects that are forgotten? The mainstream history tries to explain this by saying that this was just falsely attributed writings. Yes, of course they would say that. There was really no person named Cleopatra of Egypt. It was just a pseudonym for many different authors, and they just wanted to hide who they really were as they kept these documents recorded. Now, what makes more sense? Was there this esoteric form of thought that just happened to rise up all across the land and just happened to share these baseline themes of looking for the philosopher's stone or the elixir of life? Or were they simply trying to keep alive a philosophy that they had inherited or they had retained from the previous civilization? What do you think? And when you look at these examples of these historical philosophers or these historical alchemists, what makes more sense? Exactly. And that's kind of what they try to say when they talk about how alchemy evolved into modern science. And they even have the temerity to tell us that alchemy contributed to modern science. And that's why they don't call alchemy pseudoscience, they call it proto-science, believe it or not, as disturbing as it may seem. Exactly. Many approaches and yet the same baseline themes. And the one that's forgotten, it's a search for internal truth. It's a search for internal spiritual strength. No, maybe they developed a lot of other things. I mean, if they really had that capability, what would be the limit on any of it? Oh, look at you, Jamie, bringing in a protoculture. Robotech, Jamie, Robotech. I knew you were going to factor that in there somewhere, weren't you? Yeah, that's what we're told, but we know that's a load of hooey there, Sky Sage. We're always told that. And it's funny because, initially they support that mentality, then they deride it, and they support it again. But, as we've covered in our other explorations, they're always going back and forth. So you're not really supposed to know exactly what to make of it. But I don't think there was any evil aspect of it at all. So, oh, that's a good way to put it there. And you're probably right. And, it's probably the ongoing boss as you go throughout the whole time. Hey, Sooner West, thanks for joining us. So, historical examples. And even our aforementioned Catherine de' Medici was supposedly a studier of alchemy or a student of alchemy and even considered a master, depending on what sources you look at. So, yep, Anna Green Gables, when she was Catherine Medici. Sorry, I'm a big Megan Follows fan. I'm just going to admit it. But one of the things they never showed in Reign was some of the other esoteric pursuits that Catherine Medici had. And if Catherine Medici was a historical figure in any way, shape, or form and had the amount of influence that we did or that she did, then it would probably make a lot of sense that she was very well versed in the original studies of alchemy. And maybe there's something more to it than that. Maybe as we go into the fifth era, which the Medicis were probably an early powerful family of the fifth era, they had more knowledge. Now, did they use it for good or bad or for their own self-betterment? Well, that's a discussion we can have some other time. But it seems safe to say that certain individuals were very well read into alchemical processes, and Catherine Medici was no exception. So I just wanted to highlight her. Now we go into the next aspect of alchemy as we go past historical examples, and we talk about how it was replaced by modern science. And I think the whole reason being is that they had retained a lot of the knowledge. And the whole point of on isolating and attacking certain groups is because then you keep the unity from being whole again. That's always the mentality behind it. I mean, what was the central theme in the movie Kroll? It was to keep the two of them separated. One of them couldn't do it together. They had to be together. They had to work together. It was the two of them together. That's what it was all about. And it's never ended. Yeah, everybody's still under attack. It's a way of dividing and conquering. And so that's why they don't want people to see it this way. Exactly. And so what they wanted you to believe and what they still want you to believe to this day, and this was one of the researchers that I said, or one of the elements of research that I looked at that really got me to going into alternative research because I knew it couldn't be true. And that came down to how modern science supposedly replaced alchemy, because they tell us that modern chemistry, Modern biology and even modern medicine is derived from alchemy. Now, how true do you think those statements are? Hmm. Ah, yes. Yeah, and it could be. Or are all those esoteric thought processes just another way to confuse it? Or is there truth in them? Those are things that we can argue all day under the sun. There's many different examples with them. So, aha. And there's a lot of people that'll look in the number three. Is number three bad? Is it good? Or is it both? A lot of times, everything is both. And I think alchemy is one of the fundamental examples of being both. It can be used for good, it can be used for evil, and it can be used for indifference. Another example of alchemy in the more modern period is the example of Doctor Strange. Now, of course, I'm going to use Doctor Strange from the 1978 TV series because you can still watch it for free on YouTube. I'm not exactly the biggest fan of the modern incarnation of it. I guess it's okay, but you go back and you get to see Peter Hooton playing Doctor Strange. Actually, had some interesting costumes, and there's a lot of interesting symbols in this. And you get to see Jessica Walter in her prime. She's the one who does the voice of Mallory Archer in the series Archer, but she's wonderful in this. She plays Morgana. I'm trying to remember what her character's name was, or Morgan Le Fay. I think it was Morgan Le Fay, the antagonist. Wonderful, wonderful show though, and a lot of great symbolism within it. And it really gave you the idea of what actual alchemists were like. And when you realize what it's all about, it's not about who has the power, it's about who actually has the knowledge and who has stronger spiritual strength and internal spiritual strength. But great TV series from the late 1970s, Doctor Strange. Highly recommend it. Yes, it is a product of its time. Yes, some of the movies has that disco feel to it, but it's very intriguing and very interesting. And again, it reflects how alchemy is viewed in modern way, shape, and form. Oh, yeah. Why am I not surprised, Quantum Paradox? uh, and there was something about that series that seemed a little bit more true to what Doctor Strange was really representing, because you could even compare and contrast what Doctor Strange was in the 1970s to what Doctor Strange became in the 2010s, much like many other things. So, yeah, beyond any shadow of a doubt. But that's how they tried to replace it. And now, really, the layouts for classic alchemy became the layouts for modern science. And you can see why it looks familiar, why you've seen it, whether you're looking at an old painting from medieval times or you're watching an episode of Mr. Wizard, you see the same things. So, quite intriguing. And now we go into the darker aspect of alchemy and the theories of application. What if this was misused in some form of technology? And that's always something we have to consider. Ah, yes, he certainly did, didn't he? Well, look at that there, PJCC West. And that's one of the hardest things for all of us, to stay righteous in action, but not be vengeful. Chimeras, yes, you're leading ahead there, Jamie. But there is a darker side to it. There is a way that this can twist humanity, and not just on the outside in the physical presence, but on the inside as well. And there are many examples of how alchemy can be used for darker arts or to achieve terrifying purposes. And that's why it continues to this day. So, again, it comes down to light, dark, good, evil, however you want to phrase it. Now, oftentimes we phrase things to justify things, but the reality is it's achieving a balance. And that's what we tend to forget in a lot of the symbols. Okay, so back on to the whole theory aspect of it. And what was alchemy really throughout its development within the five eras. If we see alchemy as a base of knowledge, a science, or not a science, but a base of knowledge that came all the way back from the foundation eras, maybe even from the first era, when, in the first era is not something that's easy to talk about or explore. I'm going to get to it. But if the origin of it is in the first era, then what's happened over time is, like everything else, we slowly lost capability. And why did we lose longevity, creativity, inspiration, and self-reliance? Because we began to question the baseline aspects of what alchemy really presented us. And that was self-balance, self-understanding, self-awareness. As a result, we began to lose our sense of self and our capabilities diminished. And yet what kept us going was our promise for a return to those capabilities that we had in the earlier eras. And if alchemy represents that, and there's a lot of evidence that indicates that it does, especially if we see how alchemy itself has been subverted to being our modern science in the fifth era, then we can see that there was a time when alchemy offered so much more. What if the real explanation behind our ability to build these buildings in the distant past, in the previous eras, came from having the knowledge of alchemy? We achieved self balance, and as a result of that, we had unbelievable knowledge, the ability to achieve things that now we consider logistically impossible, the ability to create materials that seem to defy explanation to us to this day. I mean, compare bricks from what we define as the fifth era to the fourth era. Drop them off a top of a bridge and see what happens. You'll get a really good example in that respect. Oh, yeah. And it should be noted that the baseline of alchemy supposedly came from Islam when they retained it. So, yeah, I agree with you, Rebecca. And it seems like everything is done to distract us. So, I know, Jamie. Well, I had to connect it in some way, shape, or form, didn't I? And again, it's all just theories, but to me, it all seems to add up pretty well. It seems to explain why we have this diminishment of capability, why we are slowly being grinded down, losing our creativity and our ingenuity and our self reliance. We have to rely on somebody else. Now, I'm not saying self reliance means that you forget other people and you don't help other people. But what I'm saying is that your first priority in life is you have to be able to take care of yourself. In order to help other people, you have to be able to help yourself. And I think that's something that we forget. A lot of things turn us away from that. And now we go into the darker aspects of what alchemy could represent, because one of the beliefs that I have, or theories, one of the main reasons why our civilization declined so much and why we had such terrifying events that occurred in the reset time frames or right before the reset, is because of how alchemy was corrupted to making creatures such as these, the chimera, the actual hybrid. Now, do we have examples of hybrids that we try to create today? Yeah, exactly. So we're told, is it, or is there another substance beyond gold that just looks like gold? Maybe that's what it represents. Very true. Hey, Tara, good to see you. And then there's other theories. Now I'm going to get a little dark here, so just bear with me. So this chimera can be a very fearsome creature. Imagine if this really existed in some time frame. It exists a lot in myth, and there's many examples of the chimera. And by the way, it's not just Greek myth. You can also find it in Chinese myth or Chinese history and Greek history, however you want to call it, or actually all of our history. But it becomes a very terrifying creature. You also find representations of creating a chimera in the corruption or subversion of alchemy. Many different sorts of creatures. And so perhaps there's something more to the concept of the dragon, the chimera. Maybe they all did really exist. And there's many examples of it. And when you look at all the imagery and what sorts of animals and creatures that they represented, perhaps these were created through alchemical processes or a subversion of alchemical processes. Even the griffin that we see everywhere. If the griffin was created through alchemical processes, was this viewed as a more noble creature? Did this represent something that society wanted to create? And it represented the civilization at the height of its capability. This was considered a noble creature that was created with noble intentions. A real example of humanity following the image of a divine creator. Now, I know I'm going into blasphemous territory here, but just stay with me for a moment. Because what if that's what this really represents? Why do we see the griffin so much, and what is the griffin? What does it really represent? Why is it such a powerful image when we talk about the concept of Tartaria or the fourth era civilization? What does it really mean? Oh, yeah. And there is a lot to it. There's a lot to it that seems like a regal animal. And we see it everywhere. We see it in many buildings and the mix of that building. For example, yeah, I was throwing in a really bad reference there to E. Townsend Mix, but so many buildings that E. Townsend Mix did. Well, we did, but I don't think they had flags in the fourth era. I think they just put it on their buildings. Who needs a flag when you can put an actual griffin on your building? So, flags are something that we know about in the fifth era civilization. But why would you bother with a flag? I mean, even the old Roman legions, they didn't use flags, they used aquila. I would say that's a little bit better than a flag, but that's just me. That's just my opinion. So, make of it what you will. But in any event, so the noble regal animal, the griffin, made by alchemical processes, and you'll find the griffin everywhere. Everywhere. It's not just in one nation, it is all over the place. We got one example here in Iran. You can find the one in Rochester, Minnesota, in the Plumber Building. You can find it in numerous other buildings all over the place. You can find it in Europe, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, Africa, all over the place. The griffin appears everywhere. And yet the mainstream tries to tell us the origin of the griffin myth, as suggested by Adrian Mayer. Yeah, give me a break. Yes. Because they looked at skulls back then and said, hey, I think that's a griffin. And then everybody just followed along with it. No, I don't agree with that one bit. Because you see it everywhere. And it does come across as a very regal animal. And there's also many interpretations of it. Now, why would there be many interpretations of it unless there were different dimensions of it or different types? Because they were making it through a process of alchemy. What are your thoughts on this? Yeah, more terms I can't use. Just like Lemuria, don't say that. There goes this video. Oh, yeah. And I'm about to really go in the dark part of this, so be prepared. Exactly. Different types of snakes, different types of every type of animal, different types of horses, different types of humans. Is one better than the other, or is it just because there's variation? And see, that's always the thing. We're always so obsessed with what's better than the other thing, what philosophy is better, what person is better, what animal is better, when we forget that we're all part of the original design. But that's what it all comes down to. Now, here's the example of the myth. So, here you've got multiple creatures created by alchemical processes. Perhaps the winged horses were something that was created by the more approved, more balanced alchemical process, and then the chimera by something that was going more towards the dark side of the arts. And we look at other images of the chimera and we can see that as though someone decided to corrupt the processes of alchemy, and this is what they ended up with. And now we really go into the darker aspects of it, and those do exist. Now, if you're so inclined, I'm not going to show it in this little exploration, but if you're so inclined, you can look up the dark symbolism of alchemy, and it'll really take you down a very dark path. Much worse than if you look up things such as the worst threshold of hell or anything like that. It gets to be some very intense images, and I'll give you a couple examples. All right, the homunculus. I did explore the homunculus several months ago. I think it was back in the summer, where they created basically a counterfeit human being, if you will. Now, sometimes they're little creatures, sometimes they're full sized. They're not genuine human beings, though. They're counterfeit. That was the real prospect behind the homunculus. And supposedly, there you go, Sky Sage. Supposedly, that was from corrupted alchemy and the whole aspect and concept of it. And it's actually a lot more common than we realize. It's just one of those things that we're not supposed to talk about. Oh, yeah. Should have seen what happened when I tried to do an exploration on that one, Saxon Ranger. Yeah, that wasn't pretty. And then maybe it factors into how the land was repopulated. We don't know. Oh, yeah, the golem. Yeah, another way to put it. That was another term for it as well. Oh, yeah, actually, I have Sooner West, and I think it's an interesting theory. It's also funny when you mention that emojis were supposedly invented in the early 1980s, too. A lot of people aren't aware of that. I certainly wasn't, so. Oh, yeah. And I'm going to be doing an exploration here pretty soon on the Human Z. That will be an interesting one because there is a lot of reality to that, and the mainstream also verifies it. So, but yeah, back to the homunculus. And then if you want another example of how bad alchemy can get, or the darker side of it, look at no further than the Mygo, the concept of the dark creature from Lovecraft or Lovecraftian lore. And the Mygo was stated to have been created by alchemical processes, and it was an intelligent, insidious creature that used alchemical processes to terrify human beings, to do terrible things to them, and even make off with their brains. So, yeah, if you've ever read it, the Mygo are supposedly a creation of the dark side of alchemy, and they represented the worst aspects of it. And then their practices even represented the worst aspects of it. Now, there was a TV show from the late 1980s called War of the Worlds. I've covered it before. It's a pretty good TV show. And there was an episode called To Heal the Leper. You can watch it for free on YouTube. War of the Worlds, 1989, To Heal the Leper. And there's a lot of symbolism within that story that actually harkens back to alchemy. Now, we're told that these are aliens, but if you really think about it, do the aliens really come from across the stars, or do they come from some other dimension and some other existence? And of course, the plot of this particular episode, To Heal the Leper, War of the Worlds, revolves around one of the members of the advocacy, because the aliens operate in threes, surprise, surprise, and the three leaders, one of them is sick. And so then they have to take them off to try to heal them. And they end up using alchemical processes to heal this sick, quote unquote, alien or creature, or whatever you want to call it, Mygo. And it's an early appearance by actor Kim Coates, the guy who played Tig in Sons of Anarchy. It's really funny seeing, or interesting to see him in his early years, because he was a Canadian actor. The show was produced in Canada. So strongly recommend it. Heal a Leper, War of the Worlds. You get to see everything in that one episode. Alchemy, concept of alien or body parasites. Yeah, exactly. Whatever you want to call them, all depicted there, and all quite interesting. And then this comes down to the very darkest aspects of it. This is actually considered alchemical art, where you see the final and total erosion of the human being, inside and outside. And like I said, this can get very dark, so I'm not going to dwell on this because I'm not trying to freak anybody out, but this is probably the worst aspects of it. And believe me, you can find much darker representations and much more terrifying representations if you look at the worst aspects, or maybe I should say the most terrifying aspects of Lovecraftian lore. It all comes from the subversion of alchemy. Okay, that's enough of those images. All right, so the last thing I wanted to show, one of the structures that I looked at in my explorations, and maybe you don't remember it, was the Polk County Courthouse in Des Moines, Iowa. Now, why am I going back to the Polk County Courthouse in Des Moines, Iowa? Because it's right down the road from my building number 1, the Iowa State Capitol. But it's a very interesting structure because I believe that there is something. If you go to these structures in person, if you go to the Iowa State Capitol and then you go to the Polk County Courthouse, you'll get a completely different feel, a completely different intuition. And why is that? I long suspected that the Polk County Courthouse, which is what we're looking at right now, was originally a structure from the Fourth Era that was subverted in some way. In other words, it represented alchemy. Now, I may have told you, you can take video footage, you can take photographs in the Iowa State Capitol. You cannot take photographs or video footage in the Polk County Courthouse. So I had to find these images myself. What you will never see in the Polk County Courthouse, though, are these banisters. And what you have are these very frightening, and you can barely see it here. I'm trying to zoom in as much as I can, but I'm trying to prove this to you. These very frightening ram's heads that are basically, they're almost skulls. They're actually ram heads, but they appear as skulls that are on the end of these stairs. And there's a very, very disruptive and disturbing energy feeling when you go in this building, especially right after you go in the Iowa State Capitol. So if you're in Des Moines, Iowa, and you get the opportunity, you can go into the Polk County Courthouse. You just can't take any pictures. I strongly advise or recommend that you do it if you can get to Des Moines. Go to both buildings, do it on the same day, and trust your intuition and trust what it tells you, because it's really a way to figure out that there's a lot more going on. Yeah, right. You know darn well what would happen if I took some footage and I tried posting it on the channel. I think you know what would happen to any of you. So, yeah, they look like goat heads, and you won't find any pictures of them, but I can assure you they're there. Yeah, I think Jamie says it really nicely. I think the Polk County Courthouse was originally an old world building, and then somehow, some way they subverted it. If you go in there and you really look at the floor, you'll see a lot of the symbols that we just looked at. So, yeah. And do you think that's a coincidence or not? Well, Heidi, they may have been built the same, but I have no doubt that some have been twisted. And you might recall that Plummer building in Rochester, Minnesota. That one has some really strange feelings to it. So, Ah, yeah, exactly. And when you go there, Pete, that's exactly what it looks like too. So I get the feeling that this particular structure had something to do with whatever happened right after the last reset. There's some really dark vibes associated with it. So, yeah. And I'm not wondering if that's some sort of transfer or transition that's occurred to many of the courthouses because we like to look at courthouses. They're great old world buildings, but something about them has been changed. Ah, yes. Reverse the polarity, as the third doctor like to say. Good old John Pertwee. hmm And I think a lot of that's what you can really feel. And if you go to those buildings on the same day, you can get that different aspect, that complete polarization, that change in feeling. And it's all intuition, I'll admit it. But if you can see how they've been changed, that's a great way to ascertain and determine it. So, well, thanks. I appreciate that. Thanks for joining us. It's okay. It's going to be up one way or the other, I promise you. And I think that's what it represents, Sky Sage. And you can get that feeling in some of the old world buildings. Some of them you feel re energized, reinvigorated. They've retained what they were originally built for. Now, two that I can think of that are in the Midwest area, the Iowa State Capitol. And if you go down to Union Station in St. Louis, that retains some really wonderful old world positive vibes. But then if you want to see the other end of it, go to one of the courthouses and see what kind of feeling you have being in there. Hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly, Chassis. And I know it affects some people more than others. I can certainly tell you that it affects me in quite a negative connotation. I mean, like I could loiter in the Iowa State Capitol for hours and just feel wonderful. And I'm in a county courthouse for about 5 to 10 minutes, and I just can't wait to get out of there. Even with old world architecture, and I think you all know how much I enjoy old world architecture. So yeah, that could be too. And maybe the designs have been changed. We just don't know. So a lot of different aspects to it. Yeah, and you're probably onto something there, Pete. They have a different intention or a different purpose. They've been repurposed, the ones that haven't been torn down. But some of them, some of them don't feel that way. And I think that's all tied together through the knowledge base of alchemy. And I think in summation, what we can come up with this exploration in alchemy, it is a base of knowledge. It starts with balance within the self, and then it can lead to actual knowledge application. It can lead to what it promises. It can lead to eternal life, and it can lead to the ability to achieve wonders in the physical existence. Yeah, I felt the same way on that one, Heidi. So, but in any event, that's pretty much all I have or all I had set for alchemy. What were your thoughts on this exploration? I mean, I could certainly do an exploration on dark alchemy, but oh boy, I don't know if I could handle that for a whole hour just because it takes quite a toll on everybody. Oh, make a your top 10 old world arch video. Okay. No, I doubt it. Not the ones that we would think of from the fourth era civilization. I think remnants of it are still around and used, but well, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I will admit I was a little concerned going into this one because it's not an easy topic to discuss or to try to make interesting in many ways, but I think it's essential for understanding how a lot of things tie together. Oh, there you go again, Jamie. Well, and it also comes up in the Final Fantasy series quite a bit, the whole concept of alchemy, too. I think in just about every one of them. Well, at least until 2000, because like everything else. Well, thanks. I appreciate it. Well, and you know what? You can be as much of an alchemist as you want to be, and maybe you could be a really good one. And watch out, you might have Elizabeth Clara Prophet saying, I knew him and he incarnated as. Oh, well, I appreciate that. Okay. Well, here's a quick question I have for everybody. Thanks, Crypto. Alchemy of the Ancients. Yeah. And I think that's the real baseline alchemy that we want to get back to, or at least try to. So, well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's working too. It almost wasn't working. That would have been bad. Okay. Ooh, yeah, that's a good one. Full Metal Alchemist. Yeah, I like that. All right, so here's what we're looking at for explorations. I found a little bit more that we can go back into the Civil War because there seems to be a lot of interest in that. I was also going to look at unidentified aerial phenomenon and unidentified submerged objects. I know that's a new topic for me. And then I was also looking at the 1960s. So anyway, I'll get that up on the poll and see what you all think. Okay. Well, and in any event, some of these are more difficult topics, but I think that the 60s would go along well with the 1980s because a lot of what happened in the 80s was set in the 60s, interestingly enough. So, yeah, that's part of it too. Well, it's funny you say that, Quantum, because it's kind of the same problem I run into when trying to say Atlantis and Lemuria now. You follow me? So much for this live stream. Sometimes you just have to enjoy this. So, well, and one of the most interesting 30-minute TV programs came out in the 1960s. So I think you might enjoy that if you haven't heard of it. So, oh, yeah. Yeah, that came up quite a bit, didn't it? All right. Well, we'll get up the poll and you vote for your favorite one. So, well, I appreciate everyone being here and thank you for contributing. And, as always, you make it very enjoyable and you help me to improve my understanding of these topics. So, we shall continue. Oh, thanks, Sooner West. I appreciate that. Thank you, Quantum Paradox. And thank you, everybody, for being here. I mean, I know I like to do the greetings and everything, but I'm trying to stay focused and I want to make sure I talk about the important aspects of these topics and then not take too much time because, we don't like to be controlled by time, but on the same token, brevity is the soul of wit. So I'm kind of walking the fine line there. That's how I achieve my balance. So make of it what you will. All right. Well, everybody have a great week and we'll have that pull up tomorrow. And by the way, there's going to be a special exploration coming out tomorrow morning. That's going to start the final chapter in the fourth era exploration. So look out for that. Well, thanks everybody for being here. Thanks for your contributions. And I hope everybody has a great week. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you and respect all of you. And again, thank you for being here. And whether you agree with me or not, that's perfectly okay. I'm just glad that we can collaborate here and come to a greater understanding together. So, everybody, hey, Vaughn, welcome. Thanks for joining us. So, well, thanks everybody, and have a great evening or day wherever you are in the land. And we'll be seeing you soon.